Adam and Rowan from the Hypnosis Room. I guess I had a little bit of feedback, Adam, from someone. I don't know if it's coming through your TV or if it's coming from Rowan.
I think it might have been Rowan because I'm on mute here, so it definitely won't be coming from me, and I've got headphones. So, we'll have a little look at that.
I've muted my microphone.
Rowan's left the Zoom link as well, so maybe he's gonna.
I'm hoping.
Yeah. So everyone, if you haven't joined us before, we come on here every single week. We like to talk about something hypnosis, something business related, or anything within the industry. This week we're going to be talking about anxiety. Is it just in your head? Now this can have many, many different angles. But the one little thing just before we start at 9 o'clock, when we're getting at 9 o'clock, if you could press the little plus button at the bottom. If you see any friends who you think would be interested in this sort of conversation, please just add them to them. Angelo, really good to see you, my friend. It's been a long time. I hope everything's really well. But yeah, like I say, we're gonna be talking about the whole thing of anxiety, and I'm sure everyone here can agree that the conversation of this can go very, very, very deep into different avenues. So, gents, can you just speak as well, just to confirm your sound, just make sure everything.
Yeah, how's my volume coming through there, Graham?
Yeah, yours is sounding clear, Adam, Rowan.
I'm hoping. Is mine all coming through clear now?
Yeah, I can hear you clear enough. Yeah, that sounds great. So yeah, everyone, anxiety. What is it? What isn't it? And is it in your head? For me, I always like to teach my students what anxiety is much more than what they believe it is. Many of them don't really realize how it is just a performance drug, not to make anyone just suck eggs straight away. For anyone who wasn't here last week I was working at Reading Festival. I work main stage security there every year, and I had some clients in the crowd who had anxiety because they were scared of being crushed and stuff, which is completely natural in a location like that. And just being able to talk to them for a moment and give them the exact same little bit of what I'm going to talk about in a few moments, I was able to bring them down to the fact that they managed to see the headlining act that they were staying there to be, and there was no more anxiety-based relationship that was going on with the rest of the evening. They were able to actually manage it because, they were there, heart palpitating, palms sweaty, heavy breathing. But when I realized that all the body was doing was trying to get them into the best, most safest position so they could enjoy themselves, lo and behold, it was able to disappear. I get, as security, I always like to have some sweets just for those who may not have et or something, just give them a bit of a sugar rush. So after she'd had a sweet, lo and behold, she was able to calm down and allow that little bit of a buzz from the sugar to be able to carry her through the rest of the evening. And her and her friends had a really good time. So like I say, just by being able to tell them, the body is reacting in a way of how it's going to be able to make it do its best job possible. It's going to make it achieve the things that it wants to be able to achieve. And if you can learn to listen to it, you can go a lot further. So for me, anxiety is definitely in the head, but we'll go into it even deeper very soon. Adam, what about for you? Because I know you've suffered a lot with anxiety over your years. For anyone who's new, do you want to give them a little bit of a backlog on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of the reason why I got into clinical hypnotherapy, psychology, NLP. As a teenager, I left home for the first time, and in my first year of university, there was a little chain of events that took place. Basically, I chipped my tooth, so I had a missing tooth in like Freshers Week, first few days. That made me very self-conscious, and then basically the cold weather. The environment I was in, I had a skin rash on my face, and a combination of these things led me to become very, very self-conscious to the extent that I avoided people for a period of time. And unfortunately, while I was in that stage of avoiding people, it made me think a lot more about my life and about my situation. And that combination of inner dialogue and my physiology created such heightened levels of anxiety that effectively I became a recluse for almost a year. And with the exception, I think, of going out for essential groceries to the supermarket very late at night, I was hiding away. When with my phobia clients, I explained to them that my phobia was people. And if you've got a phobia of clowns or, certain animals, you can avoid them, and that's a very good coping strategy. When your phobia is people and you've got this social anxiety, avoiding people isn't very practical. So that was my short-term coping strategy, but it just meant even more isolation, even more thoughts about everything in my head, going around in circles, creating these loops. Reached the point of suicidal thoughts several times, considered jumping off the roof. I had a window leading to an outside area, considered jumping off headfirst into the concrete beneath, like in vivid detail. And that seemed preferable to living at that point. And I was 19 years old. And it was a very extreme anxiety. But thankfully, that led me to consider two different futures. The future where I kept this anxiety, and that was a very bleak future, and a future where I figured out, and I don't know where the thought came from, but I thought maybe I'm creating this anxiety in some way. And by me figuring out that this was in my head and I created it at some level, made me investigate ways to have a different recipe, get a different outcome. And thankfully, that enabled me to not just deal with the anxiety, but figure out all different emotional states. So I went from a recluse, hiding away from everyone, to within a few years, being quite successful in business, launching my own business, investing, and all the kind of things associated with anxiety and risk. But for me, those early experiences of extreme anxiety to the point of suicidal thoughts made me feel that anything in business couldn't be as bad as the situation that I was in. So I managed to find like a positive from being in a very dark place, if that makes sense. So is anxiety just in your head? I think it is in your head. For me, it was a creation of certain evaluations. I mean, physically, in terms of the neural circuitry, the sympathetic nervous system, hippocampus, amygdala, that's certainly in your head. Your brain is in your head. So I do think it's largely in your head, but equally, anyone, any hypnotherapist regularly dealing with anxiety clients, you ask them to point to the location of the anxiety, never in their head. Rarely it's in their head. Tends to be in the gut, tends to be in the heart, in the chest. Rarely is it in the little finger. Rarely is it in the toes. Tends to be in the gut, tends to be in the heart. So is it just in your head? I don't think it is, but I think it starts there. Rowan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, much like yourself, I've had a history of sort of, initially it was shyness when I was really young. I used to actually hide from my cousins when they came to visit. So I learned all the places that I could disappear in our house. And I can remember waiting till hear their cars leaving before I would come out. And that sort of developed into full-blown social anxiety. When I first moved to Edinburgh, it took me about 8 months to get further than the shop underneath my flat. And it was actually working at Argos across North Bridge, so literally a couple of 100 yards walk. And I had to get a job after that. It was like a Christmas temp job. And I ended up getting a job in a shop next door where I had to wear a suit. And I noticed the difference in the way people behaved with me in the street because of the way I was presenting myself. And that's where I started doing this work and started getting into hypnosis and NLP and things like that, and working out how to change the narrative in my head. But I'd also realized that it was something that I was doing to myself. It was something to do with the way I was thinking about things that had happened or thinking about things that might happen in the future. So I think there's this huge relevance to what's going on in our head. And even if it is something that's a physiological sensation within the body that's making us feel anxious, like it might be to do with hyperventilating in a situation, and then the sensations associated with that hyperventilation are causing us to create a mental loop that's telling us that we have anxiety rather than just explaining what it is. So I think there can quite often be a narrative in our minds that's from or coming off a physiological symptom within the body, or it can be the narrative in our mind that's actually causing the physiological symptom. I think that's probably the more sort of loop that happens, and it really is a loop. It starts to feed itself. So yeah, I think it's all in the mind, but I also believe that the mind is through the whole body. So I don't think there is the separation that we tend to attribute to the mind and the body.
I think you put that really well there, Rowan. And Adam as well, obviously from your experience. I have had a bit of a connection issue there, so a little bit of it did drop out, and please let me know if mine's dropping out too. But no, I completely agree with you both. I don't know if either of you yet have also watched that Ali Campbell BBC iPlayer. I haven't watched it all yet, but I really like that lady with the purple hair when she was talking to the person about the pain in her ankle. And the whole way of how the relation to that, I don't want to go into it too much to ruin it for anyone, but the whole way of how this person's belief and relation to the pain, I thought the lady handled it very well, and it was something different I hadn't seen before as well. Which as a therapist, it's nice to get a little extra tool, because it's kind of, and I've mentioned it here before, I have kind of an authoritative motion as to the way I work. I like to be that person that points things out directly if people realize what's going wrong. And I really like that approach to make them realize, well, if you keep putting your attention onto something 100%, you're only ever going to see that, and you'll miss all of everything else that's completely around you. And that's the thing with anxiety. For anyone who doesn't know in the audience, I'm serving in the British Army. I'm a sergeant in the Army, and I have been for 19 years. And obviously a really big thing at the moment is the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban. Many people, friends and colleagues are very much bitter, which I get the bitter side of it, but also people signing off, changing lifestyles, all this sort of thing, because they feel like everything was lost. Whereas I don't believe that. All that really matters is that 6-month period that you was out there, or however long it was at the time, and whether you come away achieving your aim during that period. Now, I've seen a quote where someone put, we only ever had a clock on our side where the Taliban had time. We only had that certain amount of period that we could do. And every single person now who's going through that saying, oh, what about Dave, or what about this, or what about the other, they're only now living whatever it is in their own mind. They are now completely trying to fight the whole of the Afghanistan war by themselves, which they shouldn't have to do. They should be talking to friends and doing that, or accepting what it is for now is what's happening and being able to do it. So exactly like what you both said, they're now throwing a narration in their mind at everything that's going on, whereas it's not what they really need to be doing. They need to be creating some sort of positivity, the things that they learn. Yes, there's a lot of negativity with deaths, losses, and the rest of it. But would the army have ever come into the future as much as it did? The development over that 20-year span was life-changing in many ways. So there's been a massive development there. Steve, as always have some great points to bring up to the table. Welcome, and what have you got to share with everyone?
Good evening. I'm firmly of the mind anxiety is not just in our heads, and of course everybody does anxiety to some degree or another. I'm just going to do a very, very quick Carl Smith on you and just tell you my story. Up until the age of 42, I was always a strong one in the family. In my friend group, people would come to me. I wasn't a therapist back in those days. I was in the motor trade. When I was 42, my daughter was born 3 months premature. That was quite stressful, but being the strong one, I got through that. Even though 2 other babies died while she was in intensive care, we got her home. Then my neighbour flipped out. He was threatening to kill my wife and my newborn daughter. That was starting to get stressful. We moved. Things seemed to calm down. Then things got worse again. Because I was always regarded myself as a strong one, I wouldn't even think about going and getting any help for this. And I ended up in hospital twice. The first time, they were convinced that my gallbladder was about to explode. This is an entire casualty team. They hooked me up to all the ECGs and everything. They did all the tests. It was only when the scanner came free and they got me in, they realized it wasn't even inflamed. My body had seemingly replicated all the symptoms, and I had no idea what a gallbladder was. 6 hours later, I was discharged, and I was absolutely fine, never came back again. About 6 months after that, I was at a big social grouping, and I had to leave, and the following day, I was blue lighted into hospital, and they thought I was having an aortic aneurysm. And again, an entire casualty team were convinced about to have this life-threatening situation. 6 hours later, I was discharged, and it was the charge nurse who was there, who I used to know from years and years ago. As I was going out, he said, "Mate," he said, "I thought you were going to die last night." He said, "I've seen a lot of people in that situation. They don't come through it." He says, there was nothing absolutely wrong with you. Have you ever thought about anxiety?" That's how I ended up being a hypnotherapist.
I think what I'd hope that you see there is that those symptoms were a result of something going on in your mind. So whether that thought process was conscious or unconscious, it was still something within your mind that was triggering that response within your body. So psychosomatic, psycho, the mind affecting soma, the body. I don't know what your view is on that, Steve.
Absolutely. I'm totally convinced of that because, and I've got to put my hand up to this, I think before the age of 40, I probably had quite a disparaging view of people who were anxious or had anxiety, because I just didn't identify with that at all. And I think a lot of people who do have, I wouldn't say a high opinion of themselves, but they consider themselves to be strong. They don't do anxiety in what you might call the conventional way. And when these things are suppressed, you're absolutely right. It comes out in a psychosomatic way. And it definitely did with me. So on 2 occasions, to convince 2 separate casualty teams, and these are medical professionals.
I think that's brilliant. What you just, I'm not jumping in. Yeah, Steve, that was absolutely brilliant, and just to see, and we all hear about so many different ways of how the problem's never the problem, and different bits like that, and how it can show all these signs. I think, I really do appreciate you sharing that with us this evening. Jessica, welcome up. I believe we're not very far away from your next title fight. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. I thought I've just finished having a massage, and it ties in very nicely with this subject, being 3 days out from fighting, and I've done all the physical training, and then it gets to the bit that I actually find the toughest, just waiting and resting and keeping myself calm and preparing. And she was talking about the tension in my shoulders. And whenever I get anxious, where do I carry tension? In my shoulders. So that kind of, when I speak to a therapist, they ask, where do you feel anxiety? It's always my shoulders tighten up and then down into my chest. But and I suffered with that last year. I had an ongoing recurring injury, and the pain didn't go. Even though the physical injury had gone, the psychosomatic pain was still there, and the underlying cause was the anxiety. So I had to learn, and this was when I was studying hypnotherapy, and it all started to make sense. But so I guess the thing that I just wanted to add was it might originate in the head, the anxiety, but it definitely isn't just in the head. We do carry that tension in our body, and it can create pain, discomfort, and it can hold us back in our performance. So say as a fighter, if we can't learn to relax, if we're carrying that in our shoulders, then we can't react in the same way, physically as well as mentally.
I think that's a really important distinction because, I was saying to Rowan, just before we went live, it's a two-way street. The anxiety that might start as an evaluation or a thought process then has a physical consequence, and that physical consequence might be as a result of more adrenaline in the blood or more cortisol. So that could produce shallower breathing, less oxygenated, more muscle tension. And as a result of that, not everyone is going to see a masseuse, or not everyone is going to have certain rituals to kind of relax themselves. And then that muscle tension, especially if there's a buildup of lactic acid, is going to stay there. And then when they wake up the next day, they're carrying that tension. And then in the same way that anxious thoughts can create tension can create anxious thoughts. It's a two-way street. So it seems to me, Jessica, you've got certain rituals and strategies to kind of, manage the psychological part, but also the physical part as well, so that you don't get caught in these loops that many people do get caught in, where they're in this kind of permanent tense state, and that can actually contribute to, exactly the kind of physiology that leads to more anxiety. For me, the metaphor that I use a lot when I'm working with anxiety clients is that a lot of anxiety is like fighting shadows. It's not dealing with the actual thing, but it's dealing with the evaluation of the thing or the consequence of the thing. And so many people, when they find themselves in anxious loops consistently, are playing this game of what if in their mind. But what if this happens? What if this goes wrong? And then they'll visualize that specific situation happening in an associated state, and they're getting the physiology of exactly what they would experience if they were actually in that moment. And this is just an idea in their head. And the problem with fighting shadows, you can't win that fight, because whenever there's a what if, you're trying to deal and anticipate a situation that isn't in the present. And that's a very frustrating thing, but the anxiety is real. And for me, one of the key things that I think is useful when it comes to anxiety is to effectively keep yourself in check and say, what can I actually deal with right now? What's the actual situation I'm coping with right now? And how do I resolve that? And just by closing a few of those loops, you can get rid of such a high percentage of the thoughts that lead to anxiety, just with an element of a filter in there to say, right, is this something real I need to prepare for? Or is it just an idea that is making me anxious, just from a thought? Jessica, do you get many of these kind of what if scenarios? Because I imagine preparing for a fight, that's part of a preparation strategy, is to role play different scenarios so that you are, thinking of all these different possibilities.
Yeah, I used to suffer a lot with the what if as well, and the comparison. And so there's a fine balance, I think. Especially now, I've got to this point, there's no point in thinking about the what if. I've done the sort of 16 weeks of preparation. Obviously, it changes throughout those 6 weeks. The last 6 weeks have been the hardest. But now it's got to the point where if I was to allow myself to continue, and I still do, compare myself to her, and because she's posting on her social media and about her previous world titles and everything, and what if she's fitter than me? My biggest one was always the fear of not being fit enough. But I know now that I have done everything I can leading up to this moment in time. There's nothing more that I can do physically. So the best way now for me to move forward is to shut off all of the what ifs and all of the negatives and focus on the positives, focus on the visualizations, the relaxation, because it is very easy to create those what ifs. What if I get knocked out? What if I get hurt? What if? But that doesn't have any positive effect. If it happens in the moment, it happens in the moment. But that's kind of the best thing that I can say on that. Obviously, in the preparation, in a strategic way, you analyze how your opponent, my coach helps me analyze what my opponent does and what I need to do and what I need to work on to get to this point. But at this point, it has no benefit.
Jessica, I think that's brilliant. Do you have an example of any techniques that you like to use to get rid of them what ifs out your head for that time being?
That's a very good question. What techniques do I use? I don't know if it's a set technique, but the biggest thing is to bring myself back to the present moment and going back to the breathing and the tension. I make sure I take a deep breath in and I feel it in my shoulders, and I even tense my shoulders perhaps. And then as I breathe out, I encourage that relaxation. And then I start to reframe it. And then I think about, this is the first time I've ever trained for a fight with everything that I now know. So I don't find myself stuck in those loops anymore, because I know how to bring myself out of it and to reframe it. And I've been spending a lot of time working on visualizations of actually creating fun in the moment. So taking the pressure away, almost turning it into a game. I did a hypnosis with Laurie Hammond, actually. And then since then, I've gone on to sort of create my own version of it. And I ran it with a fighter last night in Australia, actually. And that was incredible. It was incredible to use something that I've run through in my own mind probably at least 10 times now. I do it every night before going to sleep. I do it multiple times throughout the day. And to see them go through it and calibrate their reaction, I was like, this is amazing. I love it. But it's by incorporating that, how much fun can I have, and gratitude, all the positive emotions. So I guess answering the how do I deal with the negative what if, it's bringing myself to the present moment and then focusing on positive outcomes instead. And it seems to be working really well.
Thank you for that. I always found when I've mentioned it many times in here before, but when I first started hypnosis, just learning to leave things in the past. So whatever may have happened before, again, anxiety is trying to make you not do that same thing in the future or whatever. So obviously, as we've already mentioned, them loops kick off. But and one of them can be just simply having an argument with someone one day. I will literally turn over and fall asleep and just force myself to sleep, utilizing any hypnotic processes, eye fixation, whatever it may be, just to get myself into a nice sleep. Because if I stay awake and think about it all night, I'll wake up tired the next day. I'll be grouchy. I'll have an argument with someone. Even though I'm not a very confrontational person, you still end up in their position. So I really do thank you for that. I think that's very key for people to take away. I've just been able to find that pattern to be able to calm yourself down.
I think also,
Sally,
Graham,
you've been up here a little while. What would you like to share with us all?
Sorry, Graham, I didn't quite hear that.
Adam wanted to jump in to say something.
I was just going to say something, and I think the thing that I think a lot of the consensus is that in order to get anxious at some level, you do need to think about the future. And I think what Jessica intuitively does there is bring herself back into the present, and the element of mindfulness, just focusing on your breathing, focusing on where you are right now. It's very difficult to be in two different places in time simultaneously. So if you're in the present, you can't also be in the future. And a what if, it has that hypothetical frame. If, would, could, it all puts you in the future. So when you're thinking, but what if this happens, what if that? Because you're in the future, that's where the anxiety is. I think that the positive intention behind anxiety is an element of protection, preservation, or preparation. So if you're in the present, then you can't simultaneously be in the future. So I think that's an excellent distinction there, Jessica, that you've intuitively found. Put yourself in the present, and then that anxiety goes away, because you can't be two places in time simultaneously. Sally, what's your question or thought?
I was just going to comment on the anxiety bit. I've never really been an anxious person, but I've only really experienced it once when, I think I've said before, my sister was dying from breast cancer, and I had a problem where I was working as well. So my environment played a part in that. So it was like a double whammy. It was like I usually went into work as the job I was in. I really, really enjoyed it. When they say about not looking forward to going into work on a Monday, I look forward to going into work. I really enjoyed it. And they destroyed that at the same time as my sister was dying. So I think it was environment as well played a part in that, but also going into the situation where I wasn't allowed to do what I thought was my job. Basically, they changed my job description and took a lot of stuff off me. So when I went in, I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing. I was like, well, and nobody really gave me any direction. And that's the first time I've sort of really felt that. And I got signed off because of everything, and it just gave me general anxiety about. I didn't really want to leave. Every time I left the house, it was like, well, if I saw anybody that was from work or anything, or what they're going to say and everything like that. But I dealt with that, and part of that was dealing with the grief, and that was the only time I really felt anxiety. But I think it's in your head, but that does have an effect on your physicality as well. Because I really felt ill, and that's how I felt at the time. And I had, excuse me, sorry. I'm not talking too much, people, because I'm not going anywhere at the moment because of my broken wrist. But I had an assessment and I hit every single trigger point for anxiety in the workplace at that particular time, and I'd never experienced that before. And it took me a while to get out of that place, and I think that's part of why I went into, started to learn hypnotherapy and everything. Partly because of trying to help my sister as well, but also trying to help myself. And I've never really felt anxiety since. I mean, at the moment, I'm feeling a little bit anxious because my injury is not progressing as fast as I would like it. And I'm getting frustrated and everything. And I'm thinking, what if I don't get that function back? What if I can't do what I could do before? And I'm trying not to think like that, and I'm using my breathing to just calm myself down when those thoughts go through my head, and just breathing and just focusing on remembering what function I did have and that I can get it back because I learned that in the first place. So, that's what I wanted to say, really. Sorry.
No worries. No, don't worry, Sally. I just want you to be aware a little bit of your language you was using during what you were saying just then. I'm sure you probably don't notice it too much, but as you skip to 30 minutes on the replay tomorrow and have a little listen back, obviously you were saying about trying to get better and what if this and what if that. I can't regurgitate exactly what you said just then, but just really, like, I've listened to a little bit of what Jessica said earlier about that positivity. I know at the moment it probably is quite frustrating, but watch some documentaries about people who've been paraplegics and that and come back, and their mentality, what they need to do, what exercises they've got to do every day, what can't you do right now that you could achieve with a little bit of, not to push yourself too hard, but a little bit of push. Rowan, I could see you nodding along with what I'm saying there. Do you want to add some more?
Yeah, it's just something that's happened to me and also one of my friends. So for those of you who don't know, that I had a fungal infection in my lungs that was a result of my immune system shutting down completely due to negative self-talk and stress. And that was something that I did to myself with that negative self-talk and anxiety in my head and the depression resulting from my father's passing. And I reversed that and switched my immune system back on with positive self-talk. And I think it's important to remember that stress is not bad. Bad stress is bad. Good stress is good. And in view of this, I've got a friend who does downhill mountain biking. He came off his bike one day and actually snapped the nerve on his bicep. And the doctors told him he would never have the power, like his bicep back again. They couldn't find the nerve to reattach it. It was gone, and he would never have that muscle back. He sat and did visualization on it every day for 6 months and redrew the nerve and is downhill mountain biking with full use of his bicep again. So that positive visualization in our body, the way I look at it is our body made, or our mind effectively in some ways made our entire body. It grew everything from stem cells when we were barely an infant, So if it had the ability to grow that in the first place, it has the ability to repair that. And I think that's a really strong position to hold in your mind when you're looking at repairing and healing. And one thing, I can't give you any medical advice at all because I'm not a medical professional, but I used comfrey oil on a broken rib and it was healed in about half the time. So if it's a break, then give that a try if you do the research.
Yeah, I mean, I get moments like I guess a lot of people do, and then I pull myself out of it. And I visualizing. Can't even speak. I know how I had that function and I learned that function, so I can get that back. It's just occasional moments, and that's when I use my breathing and calm myself down and think, just snap out of this. And yeah, that's what I do. And I know my injury isn't. It sounds really stupid, but on my way to my first physio appointment, and the taxi driver said he'd been paralysed, and it was like, oh my God, this is nothing compared to what somebody else has got. But I know that maybe comparison isn't the best thing, but sometimes you just get those moments and you need to just pull yourself back. I
get it. At this time, that paralysation feels exactly the same because you've not experienced anything on the same calibre.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's a completely different aspect. Sally, thank you very much for that. And like I say, I think the tips have gone both ways, and I think that's really, really, really important for this evening. Leon, we can see you're very new to Clubhouse. I don't know if this is the first stage you've been on, and the reason we know it's new because you've still got your little fanfare in the bottom left-hand corner. What is your question this evening? Thank you for holding out for this.
Thanks. I was wondering what all the fanfare was about. Can you hear me?
I couldn't. You broke up a little bit.
You're coming through loud and clear, Leon. Yeah, the fanfare, it just means that you're new to Clubhouse.
Oh yeah, it's just the little part. It's just you have it for the first week here. That's all it is.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the fanfare. And thanks, Rowan, for sharing it on Facebook. It's my first time on this kind of platform, so it's nice to be part of the group and sharing ideas. What I'd like to add is to say, in my experience, feelings, emotions have a really useful function for us. In the sense that if you break your toe, it hurts, right? And you get pain for a reason. It's telling you this needs attended to. Okay? So our feelings might be painful, might be difficult, but often there's something needs attended to. And then what I'd say about something, with the example being anxiety, anxiety doesn't have to be, I've got anxiety or I don't. There can be degrees of anxiety. Do you know what I mean? It's like, how strong is the anxiety? There's crippling anxiety that some people have given examples of today, which is, awful and makes you stay home. But there's also mild anxiety, which was also mentioned by somebody else, might be a preparation type thing or a readying for action. So, for example, if you're a student and you've got and it's Friday and you've got an exam on a Monday and you're anxious, well, you should be. Do you know what I mean? That anxiety is telling you, or you've got an important meeting, you're a business person. Hello, can you still hear me?
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. If you're a business person, you've got a meeting the next again day, and you're not prepared for it. That anxiety is a really useful thing. So, and those examples for me, they are where the mind, so some sort of thinking process, it might be an unconscious, an unconscious thinking process, but that's taking place, that is then activating this kind of, which might be a physiological response, which is a readying for action. And it seems to me that that type of anxiety is an incredible, human resource that we use throughout our lives, in everyday examples like the ones I've given you, and even maybe these smaller ones. Oh, I need to change my bed sheets tonight. This kind of unconscious subtlety of mild alerts, like alerting us to something that needs attended to. Yeah, so I just wanted to share a little something maybe more positive. I think anxiety's been taking a hit tonight. I don't mean that hit tonight, but I mean in a kind of there's been a lot of examples where, and I know crippling anxiety is a terrible thing, and it's disruptive. But anxiety for me, in my experience, and working with others, is a very important resource that's part of our experience.
Leon, it totally is. It totally is, and I think it's safe to say that if we've evolved to have this neurological safety mechanism, and we may not exist as a species if we didn't experience fear or anxiety. We would just wander off the edge of cliffs. We would not run away from predators. So the reality is anxiety is incredibly useful in the right context. if I just thought, hey, I can fly a helicopter, if that anxiety didn't kick in and say, are you sure that's a good idea? I might kill me. I might kill lots of other people as well. So anxiety, I think in the right context is not just useful, it's essential. It's really, really powerful. And when I'm working with phobia clients, I manage that expectation and say, well, look, there's a fine line between fearless and reckless. So we don't want your fear of spiders to go to a 0, because if you're in the Amazon rainforest and there's a species of spider you've never seen before, it's pretty healthy not to pick it up. Equally, if you've got a phobia of dogs, we don't want that down to a 0, because if there is an aggressive barking dog off its lead, you don't want to pat it on its head. There is an element of recklessness if we just think all anxiety is bad, all fear is bad. So I think it's a very, very insightful and valid point, Leanne. And if this was your first time on a Clubhouse room, that is a very valuable contribution. So thanks for that.
Cheers.
Can I add to it, please?
Absolutely.
So with scenarios that are not anxiety-free, I don't think it's possible to enter a ring to fight against another human being who wants to knock you out and not experience anxiety. And as I said, we train, we're matched often months leading up to that fight. So it does become a process of managing your anxiety so that you can perform your best, and it pushes you to perform your best. It does have a positive intention. It is there to protect us. And fight or flight, a lot of the time, if you don't manage it effectively, you spend a lot of what ifs. What if I could get hit by a bus instead of entering that ring? What if I break my arm today and then I don't have to fight? And that's not a healthy way of managing it, though. And that's not the ideal way to manage it, so that you can become confident in your abilities and, I don't know, become a champion. There we go. Why not? Because that's what I'm going to do on Sunday. But also...
Of course you will, Deb. Of course you will.
Yeah, that's the right attitude to have anyway. But also, because that's fear-based anxiety, we're scared of getting knocked out or losing or failure. But it can also be reframed to excitement, and people think, oh, it's great to be excited, and that's the positive use of anxiety. But I suffered my worst with anxiety. The only time I ever struggled to eat and sleep was at the beginning of 2021. And so it was in the lockdown. I had no training, and I was focusing solely on my business. And it was fear-based because I was running out of money and I didn't know what I was going to do. But I'd convinced myself that I was in a very positive place. I just qualified, and I thought, oh, all of these overwhelming opportunities. And I was very excited. I was surrounded by these incredible people, the Jacquelines, Laurie, and I wanted to do everything. And it didn't feel like a negative, but it made me ill because I wasn't managing it. One of my ways of managing my anxiety is through keeping myself physically active, because that brings me to the present moment. That encourages that focus. So like when training to fight, I have to focus. I know exactly what I'm working towards. But in business, I found that a lot more difficult. And it didn't feel negative, but it had a negative. But yeah, I think what I want to say, summarising all of that, long-winded, I don't know what I was talking about, was that it is all about managing the anxiety, I think. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense to me.
I completely agree.
And the thing is that dose of anxiety, it has a biting point. It has an ideal balance, because if you go in there too anxious, then you're gonna not be able to read the situation and take your training into the right context. But equally, if there's not enough, you're not going to be alert. And a little bit of adrenaline. You're not going to feel certain pain when you get a kick. You need some of this stuff. So I guess the key element, and that's where you train, is to get the right balance. Too much anxiety to insufficient anxiety, not right. And that's kind of the the idea.
It goes back to that, the state of flow. So one of the elements of finding the state of flow is that the challenge matches the skill set. So you have to have the skill set, and it has to be adequately challenging, but not so challenging that it sends you into that state of panic.
Totally. You need the right level of stimulation. And that's why so many world records are broken in very public, high stimulation events like the Olympics, like, world finals, because you've got people that know how to do it, and then that boosts them a little bit, to get more out of themselves. So, certainly I think we can all agree that anxiety isn't, the bad thing that it's demonized to be. It's very useful, it's helpful. But I think we can all agree that when anxiety gets out of control, and we've all talked about these loops, when you get stuck in these loops, that's when the average person that doesn't know about anxiety and doesn't have this kind of toolkit that maybe a lot of us have, the average person tends to deal with anxiety with two ways. Number one, avoidance. So they try and avoid the thing that's causing the anxiety. And I think the next thing is some form of self-medication. And that might be drink, drugs, or food. But it's going to be some element of not getting to the root cause of why the anxiety is here, but just numbing that feeling of anxiety. And I think for a lot of people, that's how addictions are caused, as a coping mechanism to deal with some unfavorable sensation, which for a lot of people, anxiety is. Sally, what did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, no, it was just interesting because I was in a clubhouse room earlier about phobias. And there was a lady on there that said that she has a phobia about going on the tube. And she has avoided that by taking taxis. And I said, well, I questioned where it stemmed from, and she gave a circumstance, and it came out that it's more claustrophobia, and that's what it was about. But she has avoided the tube ever since, and now she quite likes taking taxis, and she doesn't want to go back to taking the tube. So she's changed her strategy in dealing with that, but she's not really dealing with the problem, which is her claustrophobia. But she wasn't ready to deal with that. So, you have to be ready to deal with the heightened anxiety, because it did give her anxiety going on the tube. She was worried about being trapped and things like that. So, and a lot of them, like Leon was saying about fear of dogs, there was a guy on there that was afraid of dogs. And I said, well, that's a natural, if a big dog comes up to you off a lead, you're going to be anxious. And that's good in a way, because that's a protection mechanism. Or, so you don't want to get rid of that entirely. So that's all I just wanted to say for that bit.
I was just going to add that I know about a hypnotist that was dealing with someone with a bee phobia, and he gave them the suggestion that bees were cute. And they found him outside during the break in a hedge covered in bees, and had to actually bring him back out. So it just gives us proof that we do need to have these anxieties a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Yeah, but I think that's been absolute gold of the conversation tonight. I'm sure, well, everyone on the stage can agree as well. The different things that we go through. Anxiety. I always remember back in my youth joining the army, I never used to like getting up and talking and presenting to people. I physically remember having a pounding heart, thinking I had to talk to people about stuff that, although I'd researched and never necessarily knew enough about. And now I live my life on here. I live my life teaching hypnosis. I live my life teaching people how to control stuff in the military, and giving them tips that can bypass it as well. So, we all know that anxiety can be very easy to assist, depending on the assistance from the person as well. Because obviously, if we're going against it, it's definitely going to cause that difficulty in bypassing it as well. And yeah, like with everyone who's come up this evening to give their side towards anxiety, whether that person is just staying in their head, whether they have a physiological sort of outbreak or something, then there's definitely, I think the biggest one's always time to listen to the backstory. if you can listen to that backstory, even if it's not necessarily completely linked, you can, by virtue of acute listening, work it very well towards achieving your output goal towards that person. We've got about 10-15 minutes left. I was just wondering, has anyone else from the audience got anything they would like to add to this? Obviously, I'd also like to take a moment to wish Jessica massive luck, and I'm sure you can all agree with that for this weekend. Got no doubt in you at all. Keep yourself nice and relaxed, and we'd love to hear the results next week. And also, I can't see anyone coming up at the moment who wishes to share some stuff. Oh, there we have. Steve's back up. Go on, Steve. Here he is. Steve, what would you like to share?
Hi there. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work with anxiety clients just lately, and a methodology which I found particularly effective is ego state work, getting them to identify the ego states that's running the elements, and sometimes it's different ego states running different elements of it, and getting them to make those changes and associate into new, more helpful ego states. I just found that to be really, really powerful. I'll be interested to hear other people's view on that as well.
Well, Adam's just sat up like a meerkat in an instant, because I don't know if you know, ego states are massively intertwined. Adam, do you want to answer this one?
I love working with ego states, or parts therapy, or resource states, as Emerson would call it. For me, I'm constantly impressed and amazed at the relationship between these different kind of states or parts within the subconscious mind. And when I do parts therapy, whether it's for anxiety, phobias, or whatever it might be, I think the key to it is just getting to the root that there is that positive intention. It's the thing that Leon was saying all the way through, and that is that the purpose behind the part responsible for the anxiety tends to be to protect or prepare or help in some way. It wants to keep you safe. Where it gets slightly complex is where it's so obvious if we go back in time and we say, right, there's a saber-toothed tiger. It wants to eat us. Therefore, having an evaluation that your life's in danger rapidly to the point where you've got more adrenaline that you can run faster, no one's going to argue that that is a useful form of anxiety. The problem is that if you've got a part that says, right, you're going to be evaluated really harshly if you mess up this speech to your peers and your colleagues on that stage. That same neurology that evolved over millions of years to help us escape from a predator is also going to escape from any perceived threat or danger. So these ego states that are trying to keep you safe sometimes end up in the executive when they should not be in the executive, because generally when you're anxious, you've got a hell of a lot of inner dialogue. So if you're in that context where I don't think anxiety is particularly helpful, like doing public speaking, it's very difficult to talk to an audience if you've got chatter going on inside your own head. So I completely agree, Steve. I think the role of ego states in terms of resolving anxiety and also forming that form of negotiation, such a powerful principle. But the similarity between everything that we've talked about is that there is still that positive intention behind whatever you call it that's responsible for that anxiety. And that's the key bit, I think, in making a change, is to acknowledge the positive intention, but say, hey, maybe there's a better way of doing this that doesn't have all of the negative connotations of that anxiety. Steve, how do you use these ego states to deal specifically with anxiety in the clients that you work with?
I've mainly been using Mike Mandel's ego state protocol, and it's just describing to the client that the concept of ego states, and we have about 15 or 20 we use on a regular basis, and this model of them all living in a bungalow with a narrow door on the front. Only one can come to the door to face the world, to handle different situations, and that there's a basement below where the less used ego states are, and then in the corner of that basement there's the bomb shelter where the evaded ego states are, the damaged, wounded parts of us that come from early experience and that sort of thing, and they can sometimes invade and take over and hog the executive, and just get them to identify and personify it. Sometimes as an animal, children very often love doing this because they imagine this ego state as an animal, as a character or a cartoon character, and then I get them to change it, and the results are just so profound. I'm convinced now that pretty much anything can be tackled with ego state therapy.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Steve, and I really like Mike Mandel's thing that he does that not a lot of people do with ego states, and that is change the submodalities of the physicality of them. So he'll encourage, and I found myself doing this as well, encourage people to describe how the part responsible for that behavior, whatever that behavior is, how does it look, and if they're not aware of things, you can make their eyes bigger, and if they're very whatever it might be, it might be very quick to get angry, you can kind of give them a bit of perspective or compassion or whatever it might be. But changing the physicality and the submodalities of them also is quite profound, as well as, and for me, I'm convinced that the negotiation with them, give them a new role to play that taps into their true intention, is a really useful way of ego state work. Or I'm inclined to use more often resource states, as Emerson kind of evolved it to, because I think all states could potentially be resourceful in the right context, and I think a lot of the time they're just not used in the right context, which is why there's a problem there. But thanks for that, Steve. I agree with you. I think parts therapy is such a powerful way to deal with so many different issues. I can see someone's raised their hand. It's Andrew, but I'm struggling to bring Andrew up. I don't know if... There we go. Andrew, welcome up. Do you have a question or a point you'd like to share?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'll just share a point. So, anxiety is interesting, in a lot of different ways. Nobody really has the one answer to it, I don't think yet. But what I've found is everything is frequency. And so anxiety holds a frequency. And therefore, you can, alter the frequency. Also, using, state control with physiology, language, and focus. We can choose what to focus on, what you do want or what you don't want. Train yourself to focus on what you can control, what you do have already, not what you don't have. I think a lot of people's minds are crowded, but they also don't focus on what they want or what they don't have. And when you're taking on a problem like anxiety, it's because of your focus. And I think that people focus upon what they don't have, and that causes them to, I got to get to Walmart. I don't have it. I got to get on Amazon. You see what I mean? And then, focus on what you can't control. It's COVID. It's going crazy, this variant, you see, and then focusing on, what you don't want to happen. I just don't want to get the symptom. I really don't want to get, you see, and then all of a sudden life does become a little bit anxious because of what you're focused upon. And so, for me, I think it's content creates reality is my, kind of way of framing the world. And so if you carefully create, curate which content you take in, you're, watching your personality more closely, because your personality is your personal reality. And so your reality that is personal to you is created upon the content that you've taken into this world. That's why somebody, believe one thing one day, and then the next day they watch a show and it's a totally different belief. You see what I mean? And because content always is flooding in more in this moment, in fact, than ever before. And I mean, literally flooding in the next 10 seconds, how many millions? YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, Insta, all you name it, they have it. Like, it's just real simple how videos and posts and blogs and all this books, all this stuff is flooding out to the mind. And so I think it's fueling people in a way that has never been done before. This information age causes the brain to go wild, and it can get very anxious, living off into the future, and rather than recognizing the present moment. So for me, state control is, changing the anxious state to a more positive state. And just doing that with the focus, paying attention and training yourself, like I said, to focus on what you do want, the language, everything is working out for me. Everything's working out best case scenario. Isn't it great that we're going to have all these things that we get to do rather than have to do? So the language, it does play a huge factor. And then physiology, of course, too. You're not going to be breathing and sitting a certain way if you're anxious than if you just want to race, or if you just got the girl and our number. You see what I mean? Like, you have a physiology to different aspects and events in your life, and whatever physiology you force the body into, like you even pretend that you got the girl, you see what I mean? Then you get into the process of tying that confident feeling in, and that changes the state out of anxiety. So frequency is what anxiety is. Sound frequencies have been proven. I know I'll just drop this, the Sapien Medicine on YouTube channel. It's a beautiful channel with frequencies that you can listen to. I use that a lot to just make a clear, okay, here's the content I'm going to listen to. And then that does create a reality. It does shift whatever frequency I was in before I listened to that. That ties into some morphic frequencies and Rife frequencies. But that can get, that's a whole rabbit hole as to what those can do. So yeah, it's just a process of, state control, knowing the physiology, the language, and the focus. That's Tony Robbins' state control triangle, if you want to Google that and see an image of it. And there's a lot of notes out there too of people that have worked with Tony and Jim Rohn, and all these great teachers that have been on our path are there because, they are still there. Tony's still doing work to, now of just, being able to apply a lot of different things. I think ideally, anxiety, I've been treated by medicine. In 2017, my personal journey, I got diagnosed with Graves' disease. So I went on to WebMD, and I was like, yeah, I definitely got more irritable, and I got this anxiety thing. And for sure, I just got a little, more and more rushed, and then went to the doctor, and I'm like, hey, I got this anxiety thing from the Graves' disease. And he's like, yeah, you do. Here's Ativan. And don't take it every day because you'll get addicted to it. So I go off with my Ativan. The last thing I heard was every day. I was like, all right, well, I'll just take this in the next few days and every day and see what happens. And then sure enough, 3 months into this stuff, I'm hooked to this, mind-altering, mind-bending substance. Like Googling, how do I get off it? And they're like, oh, you can't really wean off it. Just go, and then some people are like, other schools of thought. So I just took myself off this thing. And then I went into a practice of Vipassana meditation and some other techniques like pranayama and Wim Hof breathing instead. And that's what I decided to substitute the content for. And then when I did the Vipassana is the practice of just saying, hey, the mind, it's busy, right? So we're going to sit the body down for 15 minutes, close the eyes, and put the mind on the breathing. And now that you're paying attention to the breathing, that's giving the mind something to do. And, the mind's never going to shut off. We say 60,000 thoughts a day. It's never going to stop. And so you're not stopping thinking with Vipassana. You're putting your attention on something, for the breath. And where does the breath come in? Where does it come out? There's many ways to focus on the breath. You can just put a word to it, in and out. It's simple, but it's not. It's simple, but it's not easy. So it's, a practice. And so you practice and you focus on the breath for 15 minutes, and then the 15 minutes is up and you feel good. And you do that for 30 days, you feel really good because you just achieved the goal the guy set for you. You do it for 3 years, and life, how many conscious breaths are you taking in a day? You're counting them. The breathing becomes more aware. The better you breathe, the healthier you are anyway. So, it just puts your focus in such a perspective as to whatever is happening, well, you're breathing. So whatever happened had to happen to this point, up to this point where you could breathe and see and hear and be where you are right now. So I'm Andrew. That's what I got. Wholeness.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And I think, it's a really important point because I think when people are anxious, they tend to breathe shallow from the chest. And having that kind of deep diaphragmatic breath, tends to get people in a different state. I think we've come to the end, Graham. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Andrew actually just because I know he already jumped in right at the end, but he kind of summarised everything that we've kind of gone through in the last hour in that 5 minutes, which was pretty awesome as well. So what's it called? I think yeah, everything from there is it just shows how we're all thinking on that level state. It's brilliant. How and where everything is. For me personally, yeah, anxiety. We all experience it. If you haven't experienced it, you need to check your pulse personally because otherwise there's something wrong. I think the biggest thing about anxiety is understanding it. Once you understand it, then you can get it. And a lot of it comes down to a lot like what Andrew said a minute ago. It's talking to yourself and understanding yourself. Once you understand yourself and talk without it being in a loop, you'll find yourself being perfect. A small plug just to finish with, if anyone is interested in building their brand this weekend, I'm hosting the wonderful Bev Gisborne, and she'll be taking you how to build your brand with Canva. That's on my hypnosisonlinemeetups.com. Hosted at 8 p.m. this Sunday. So if anyone's interested, please do have a little look at that. And Adam or Rowan, have you got anything you'd wish to add just before we finish? Willie, I do apologise. We're going a little bit over time, but hopefully we can jump back in next week or we can chat offline.
I think just to summarise, is it just in your head? I don't think it is. But does your thoughts influence your ability to get anxious? I think it definitely does. And one final tip from me, I would say, is that within a dialogue, when you have those kind of what if thoughts, a great inner dialogue response to that, to close that loop, is I'll handle it. It'll be okay. I've got this, and that's just a nice way so that you don't have those open loops. It's the open loops that can cause a lot of anxiety. So thank you everyone for joining us today on this topic of anxiety. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to all the speakers that joined us up on stage. Really appreciate your input and questions and thoughts there. Rowan, any final points from you before we wind up this room?
Yeah, I think, like you say, it does start all in your head. And I think it's really to do with symptom control, attentional bias, and interpretive bias. So a lot of it's to do with where we're putting our attention and how we're processing what this means to us. So feeling like these feelings control me instead of I can control these feelings. And we know that we can move our body and change the way we think. So I think for me, it is all in our head, and it's all to do with where we're putting our attention and how we're interpreting things. So I'll leave it from there. And thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Beautiful as always. Everyone, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week at 9 p.m. For another hour of deep discussions all about hypnosis and the world of hypnotherapy. Take care, everyone. See you soon.
Take care.